In a world where mental health problems are used as common tropes in various forms of storytelling, therapist Ryan Engelstad and executive producer Mike Graham try to determine what lines up with real life and what is just exaggerated fantasy. Listen as we delve into the fantastical tales told about mental health in books, movies, and television. This is Pop Psych 101.
Welcome back to Pop Psych 101. I am licensed therapist Ryan Engelstad here, not as always, but very excited to have her. Not Mike, not Matt, but Marie from Mxiety Show. There's probably a more accurate description or more accurate title of your show. I just know you as Mxiety.
No, that totally works. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, thank you for coming on. We're very excited to have you. For the listeners, Mike is taking a break this week, taking care of himself, which we are strongly encouraging both him and anyone else who's needing a break to do so.
Absolutely.
And filling in, we have Marie. So Marie, thank you so much for joining us on Pop Psych 101.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I do hope your usual co-host feels better soon. But it's really cool to be part of this, even if it's just for a little bit, even if it's just for one episode. And I'm overexcited for what this episode is about and everything. So it's awesome.
Yeah. So again, thank you so much for coming on. Obviously, we've been on your show previously, which is one of the reasons why we reached out to you, because we had such a good conversation with you. I wanted to give you a chance really to share a little bit with our audience what your show is all about, what you do, sort of how it came to be, and then we'll jump into today's topic.
Awesome. So my show, I record on Twitch. I have a live stream on Twitch, and the whole idea came from the fact that when you have a live discussion, you're going to get a very different feel for the audience. The reason I started doing it that way is because what I found was that there was a lot of conversation happening from professionals with professionals. There's a lot of conversation happening with people who are suffering with mental health issues, and they themselves want to share their experience, but there's nobody really, I didn't find that there was somebody in the middle kind of bridging that gap and helping those people have conversations and then translating that to the layman, right? To the regular
Absolutely.
guy. Yeah. And so I wanted to bridge that gap. I wanted to start having conversations, whether it's with professionals, whether it's with people who are sharing their own experiences. And it was super important for me to do that live because people have the opportunity to communicate and ask live these kind of questions that they might not have the opportunity to talk to anybody about in their regular life, even the silly questions like, I don't understand why I can't just feel better, why can't I just be happy? So-and-so said that if I go outside, I'm going to feel better. Is that true? Giving a place and a platform for people to be able to discuss that, to share my own experiences, to say, hey, it's cool to go to therapy. Hey, it's cool if you need to take medication. It's cool if you don't do any of those things. I didn't see a space for it and I wanted to create it. And I'm actually really excited. I mean, I have guests like you on, but just in general, I'm really excited to have created that space in the community that I have created and the environment that they foster that enables me to have amazing guests like you guys on.
Yeah, so it was incredible for us to be on, and I've watched a couple of your streams on my own, seeing the interaction that you have with the audience. I love that it's live. I love that you're able to do it as often as you do. I feel like that probably creates a consistent availability that, your audience can kind of get really comfortable with you pretty quickly, which is really cool. So we're obviously thrilled that you're doing what you're doing. And obviously we've talked about coming on the show again. We would love to do that.
Oh my gosh. It's only a matter of time before you guys are back on the show. And it's only a matter of a movie. So we got to figure that out. Because,
that's right.
Yeah. Next time we're analyzing a movie for sure.
Okay. And you also do fun stuff with the show. I understand you do like yoga live streaming, all sorts of other things. Tell the audience a little bit about that.
Oh yeah. So with the subscribers, so you can subscribe to people on Twitch. So one of the benefits that they have is yoga Saturday mornings. We also watch movies together once a month. So that's just the kind of stuff that like we end up doing together as a community, and that continues the community building and the feeling of a space that's safe, that people can come to and talk about their issues without feeling judged, and more importantly, without feeling where they're comfortable to be silly and not do yoga properly, to watch a movie and overanalyze it, even though it's just a Disney movie or whatever you might say. So yeah, so we do that as well.
Well, I would never say it's just a Disney movie, especially not today, because that's one of the reasons that we wanted to have you on, is because you are a Disney aficionado.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Am I?
So here you are, and today we're going to be talking about Inside Out. So with that, let's get into it.
I know you don't want me to, but I miss home. I miss Minnesota. You need me to be happy, but I want my old friends and my hockey team. I want to go home. Please don't be mad. Oh, sweetie.
We're not mad. You know what? I miss Minnesota too. I miss the woods where we took hikes.
In the backyard where you used to play.
Spring Lake where you learned to skate. Come here.
Today we are talking about the 2015 animated Pixar movie, Inside Out. Do you ever look at someone and wonder what's going on inside their head? Well, we get to see what's going on inside the head of 11-year-old Riley Anderson as she copes with growing up and later on moving from Minnesota to San Francisco when her father accepts a new job. Inside Riley's head, we see her emotions play out, including joy, sadness, anger, disgust, and fear. After moving to San Francisco, things start to go downhill for Riley when joy and sadness accidentally get sucked out of headquarters and Riley is left to fend for herself with only fear, anger, and disgust to guide her. Joy and sadness travel through Riley's long-term memories and different islands of personality, learning a lot about each other along the way. They race against the clock to try to prevent Riley from making the impulsive decision to run away from home. As Joy, with Riley's imaginary friend Bing Bong, recognize how important sadness is to Riley getting the help she needs, they overcome incredible odds and Riley's memory dump to get back to headquarters and save Riley from making a terrible decision. And that is Inside Out.
That's awesome. That's exactly how I remember it. And I think you actually brought up some key points there that I was like, oh, I kind of forgot that happened, even though I've watched it an insane amount of times.
And it's an insane movie. There are so many different levels and layers to this movie that we could talk about. And it's sort of, I don't even really know where to start, but I think I kind of have to start with my own sort of personal response or connection to this movie.
Oh yeah.
So we have Riley Anderson, right, who's 11 years old when she moves from Minnesota to San Francisco. Oddly enough, I moved from Maryland to New Jersey when I was 13, so not too far from Riley Anderson. And it's just, there's a lot of themes in what she experiences during the course of this move that were very familiar for me, and then as a result, really emotional. I did not have an imaginary friend that I matured out of, but there were a lot of other things, whether it be losing friends or the sort of difficulty adapting to a new environment, all this sort of stuff that really hit home for me. So I know you have some reasons that this hit home for you as well, but I just had to kind of share up front that like this is a really emotional movie for a kids movie.
It is, and it doesn't really hold back any of that either, considering that it is. I mean, I think the target audience is kids, but like thinking about it and the depth of psychology explanations in it and everything, that it's questionable. I don't know. But to your point, one of the first things that's also relatable to me is I also actually moved countries. When I was 14, I moved from Russia here to to the US.
Wow.
Yeah, so that was accompanied with obviously culture shock, but that whole idea of losing friends, trying to understand where you stand now with people you used to know, and how you're going to fit into a new place. And then there's just a lot of experiences that Riley goes through that as you're watching, and I'm sure anybody who's moved, anybody who's ever felt like a fish out of water can really get. Then there's like and I don't know if I should get into it now or later.
Oh
but
yeah, no, let's just dive right in, because from the opening moments of the movie, as a therapist, I'm like, yes, they are nailing this, they are killing this, every single thing. The way that they portray the sort of internal monologue and the way the different emotions interact, I was just blown away that they are able to kind of create this really cool metaphor for how our emotions sort of operate inside our own head. So you sort of said you're not sure how on base it is, I guess. And for me, everything that I've learned, everything that I've, worked with patients, says to me that this is as close as I've seen to like a metaphorical way to show how our brains work and show literally how our internal like operations work. So I don't know if that stuff connected as much with you, but
Oh
I
my
just
gosh.
like was tickled constantly.
100%. So I actually, after I saw the movie, I had an appointment with my therapist just by like happenstance, right? And I was like, you need to go see this right now, because I need to know, because I think it's accurate as somebody who's been dealing with mental health issues for the past 10 years, who's a student of psychology just out of curiosity, with a background in like scientific. I was like, I think it is. I really think it's really close, and it's getting these points, but I need you to tell me that that's legit. And I remember then she watched and she's like, holy smokes, they nailed it. They totally nailed it with the mood board and how the moods interact and how our memories are stored, and what the journey is like from kind of your headquarters across all your memories and back around. Like, it's just fantastic. And by the way, I want to tell you, you really missed out by not having that invisible friend, just imaginary friend.
Yeah, it's funny. My daughter actually has an imaginary enemy.
Oh my God.
So it's I don't know how or why this started. Maybe it was from Inside Out. I couldn't tell you, but she has, and we've tried to get her to describe this character. Its name is Beta. Not that far from Bing Bong.
Not
So
that far,
maybe
yeah.
it's from Inside Out. I don't know, but it's this imaginary character that kind of messes with her from time to time. And it's like, it's not like she's not sad. She's not like bullied by it, but it's just like, oh, that Beta, she stole my toys. Oh, she tripped me. And it's just like, oh, what are we going to do? So it's just, it's stuff like that. And even I want to go through the 5 emotions real quick, because I think that's really hit home for me, especially even the sort of initial introduction of each of one of them, right? So we start out with just joy, and how nice to see a baby that's their only emotion that they can experience.
Oh my gosh. Those were the days.
Yeah. But and I think it's very appropriate for sadness to be next, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're a baby, either you're fine, you're perfectly content and you're smiling or you're giggling or just making funny little noises, or you have a need that's not being met, whether that's a dirty diaper, you're hungry, you're thirsty, you're hot, you're cold, you're lonely, whatever it is. And how do babies get those needs met? Well, they cry, right? So that's sadness. I mean, it might sort of be anger, it might sort of be fear, but for me, it's absolutely sadness is the best way to represent how babies kind of have to get those needs met. So I love that was how we were introduced to those first 2 core emotions.
Absolutely. Just a point. I recently learned, so not imaginary friend wise, but I just recently learned to kind of separate that again, I'm going to bring it back to my therapist because she's a wonderful human being. But we kind of depersonalized my depression into this depression monster. And so I kind of like the fact that, you're describing with your daughter that she has like this thing to blame stuff on that she can't necessarily explain when stuff is going on. That's kind of, I'm doing that as an adult, and I don't know, like, is she really ahead of her time, or am I like really regressing? I don't know which one it is. It's great either way, I'm pretty sure. But I just thought that was funny.
Yeah, most of the time I feel bad for her with a therapist as a father, but
Right?
I'm
Oh my gosh.
hoping she's ahead of the curve. I don't know. Time will tell. But yeah, I love what you said in terms of how people are able to sort of depersonalize the difficult emotions, especially things like depression, anxiety, because when you can put it outside of yourself and see it as almost like this adversary, it becomes something that is something you can kind of more directly challenge. And
Yeah.
especially when it comes to like those negative thoughts,
Yeah.
you can kind of identify that those thoughts are not coming from inside of you. Really, it's
Yeah.
not, that's not you that feels that way. That's your depression or that's
Yeah.
your anxiety.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's really awesome that they created these characters, because I mean, I, as a child, didn't really have an idea that those things, like how to even explain them, what the names of these emotions are. So I think it's fantastic to have this movie that personalizes things that are a lot more I mean, it's the reason, and you've talked about this on a previous episode, maybe a fan here, but it's the reason play therapy works, is because you're able to like put it onto this other thing, and then you're able to explain from there, hey, oh, okay, I get it. This is how this works. So watching these characters, watching these 5 emotions interact, you're able to say, oh yeah, so I guess joy was really, in charge of my brain today, and sad. Like, that's so cool to give kids the opportunity to put a name to things that is so characterized, that's so rich and well, like each of those characters was well rounded in their own right. And I think that that's fantastic, because that's something like I could have used as a kid to better explain what the heck was going on in my brain.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, even if you break down the voices and shapes of each character, I think that's so well done. Joy, obviously, voiced by Amy Poehler, is, just constantly twirling around and sort of is star shaped with her dress and really embodies joy as she should. Sadness kind of feels like a teardrop shape.
She's a blob, and that's how I also describe depression. Like, it's very blobby.
Absolutely.
Makes you feel like a blob.
And half the time she's just sort of being dragged around by joy, or that's just sort of her representation. And she is voiced by I think it's Phyllis Smith.
I just remember it's the office lady.
Yeah. So again, a great voice for sadness. So then after joy and sadness, we meet fear, who, as we know, keeps Riley safe, which I think is such a nice neutral way to describe fear, that fear doesn't have to be this bad thing that we can't deal with, but it's this thing that actually has a job. And I think that's so nice, especially for kids, but even for adults, to be able to kind of recognize that fear is a useful emotion, and it sort of tells us something important.
Yeah. Oh, I did love that. And there's also a line there from fear, right? You're only a hop skip away from fear to anxiety then as an adult.
Absolutely.
Right. So I thought that it was really fascinating that they showed kind of fear remains fear because he's balanced out by these other guys, right? He didn't get to run the show. He didn't get to take over, and he didn't, like, he would propose certain things and he would kind of catastrophize things, but he never got away with it because the other emotions would be like, that's just fear.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's really cool.
And he was sort of like a worker in the mind more than a person that was controlling it. Now, that's not to say when people are dealing with a lot of anxiety that fear is probably running the show, right? Is running headquarters.
Right.
And that can be a difficult place to be. But yeah, so fear voiced by Bill Hader.
Fantastic.
Excellent job. And he kind of looks like a little like a frayed nerve ending.
Yes.
That's the sort of way that I took that. Yeah, which is awesome. So then we meet Disgust, voiced by Mindy Kaling. Awesome job. We sort of initially meet her as the sort of reaction to broccoli. And as they describe, Disgust keeps Riley from being poisoned physically and socially. And I just love that description of disgust, because it's not just, I don't want to eat that food that I think is gross. It's, I don't want to do that thing that other people might think is gross or not cool or whatever. I won't be accepted. I just think that's a really, really simple, beautiful way to identify that emotion.
Right. She's another check.
Absolutely.
in that set. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we come to anger. And as is described in the movie, anger cares very deeply about things being fair. So there's that early scene when Riley is just like a toddler. I think it's the same thing. They're trying to give her broccoli. I don't know what the dad threatens her with, but then it's like, oh, you want to see that old man, and he sort of blows the fire up,
Yeah.
and then she starts freaking out,
Right.
and then here comes the choo-choo train. He's like, oh, we got a choo-choo train.
Yeah.
And so then the anger, the idea that it's fair or unfair is kind of then completely disappears. And again, I love that he's obviously voiced by Lewis Black, which couldn't be more perfect.
Oh my God. I remember when I heard about this movie and I saw the cast, I was just blown away. I was like,
Yeah.
that's how I would have, if you had asked me how
Yep.
to cast this, I think I would have picked the same exact people. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and he's like this little brick that lights on fire, essentially, whenever things go bad. Yeah, so those are the 5 emotions, and it's interesting when you read about this movie. I was doing my research. They did sort of consider a bunch of other emotions as characters over time. Joy apparently was initially thought of as optimism, and they sort of identified that that's not actually an emotion. It's just sort of a way people think, and it can be the way that kids think for sure. I would say kids, at least initially, are generally optimistic. But then apparently there was also going to be a surprise emotion. I don't know if you were up on all the alternate emotions.
I'm
that were
not.
gonna be.
I appreciate knowing that. But is surprise really an emotion?
So it's a good question. I think for me, it's more like an emotional reaction. Like it's never a constant emotion, which all the others feel like they could be constant. So again, it sounds like, again, from my research, surprise was basically subsumed into fear. So all the things that they had written or identified for surprise, they just fleshed out fear as an emotional character.
I kind of get that. And the 5 that do remain, again, I kind of want to go back to this point that I feel like they can all exist individually in some way, shape, or form. Together, they make for a healthy person, but all separate, like each of them could run the show and potentially kind of really sour things depending on who's running it, right? But like surprise couldn't run anything. I don't know. Optimism.
No, you're right. Yeah.
Optimism couldn't really run the show. So I'm really happy with this like kind of basic color block, right?
Yes,
that they ended up
yes.
picking. The kind of the Roy G. Biv of emotions.
Yep. Yeah. So obviously we love how these emotions were portrayed. And then, Riley goes through her move, as you and I have both talked about. For me, it was really neat, obviously, and we're going to talk about memories, I think, in the second half, because I think that deserves its own sort of breakdown. That's its own real piece of this movie. But in terms of, the story here, we have Riley, who goes through her first day of school. Obviously the move itself is almost like borderline traumatic, they don't get all her stuff. So they're building all of these sort of intense events over the course of this one major life event. Right?
Yeah.
And then along the way, you sort of see how the different emotions are sort of competing to respond and competing to, sort of to be heard, really. When the stuff doesn't show up, it's like, okay, now we hear from anger and fear and disgust. They see the dead mouse, and it's just like, it was really cool to see them sort of compete for control over the, what's that called? Like the board, right?
Yeah. I think it's just called the control board, right?
Control board, yeah.
I found it to be really cool. It is like real life where as a kid, right, you're going through this huge event. You probably haven't gone through something like it. And it's very much, and adults do this too, when we're like, oh, this is a really tough thing that I'm going through. And now everything is going wrong. And you're just more likely, because you're in that stress state, to only be looking at everything that's going wrong, right? Like she's looking at the dead mouse, she's looking at the broccoli, she's not in the place where maybe she'd be like, oh, well, at least I'm with my family. Or like, there's no really room to look at the positives. Like, oh, I'm going to meet new kids and maybe I'll do a different sport. Like, that's not where she is. And all the emotions are reacting exactly to that. Like, oh my gosh, everything is wrong because we have no control over what the heck is going on right now.
Yeah. So I think with that said, I think I want to do a little bit of a breakdown of sort of what exactly is going on for Riley, because there's a lot of questions, are we seeing depression? Are we seeing what we might just call like an adjustment disorder, where she's having this very intense emotional response to this major life change? And I think this is something that people are sort of wondering. So for me as a therapist, when I'm looking at Riley, I definitely am seeing some signs, especially as the movie goes on, of not necessarily full-blown depression, but like signs that depression could be oncoming. There are really some some very clear sort of metaphorical displays that Riley was obviously headed in a dangerous direction. So, obviously I did the summary up front, but, so she moves, she has this terrible first day of school. And as these bad experiences are mounting, anger, of course, comes up with a great idea of, well, let's go back to Minnesota where we can sort of recover all of our positive experiences, because that's where the positive experiences happened.
Right.
And I totally understood the flawed logic behind that, because they're in this new place and they don't see it for having any positive value.
Right.
And when you talked about moving before, for me, that adjustment process of trying to make new friends, trying to fit in a new school. For Riley, she tries out for the hockey team, but then sort of gives up halfway through the tryout. Like, all of these negative events are really leading her to sort of this. And it's not because she's not sad, right? Because the sadness is lost in her long-term memory. But it's this sort of numbness that we start to see with Riley.
Yes.
Where, she, anger and disgust and fear are sort of trying to help her, I think, act like joy or act and make things okay, but they are really struggling. And that's when, for me, we start to see hints of what we would think of as childhood depression. So I don't know if that felt like that way to you as you sort of watch, but.
So as somebody, I was diagnosed with depression about 10 years ago now. And I remember watching Riley and thinking to myself, like, oh my gosh, this is 10-year-old me, because I remember looking back, like, there were definitely signs that something wasn't right. Yep. But the thing that we note, that the thing that kind of helps Riley, and they do fall apart a little bit, but she has these solid foundations, right? She has these kind of cornerstones that her mind is built on, like her family. And so they all end up falling apart, but those are important pieces that kind of, I think, they help keep her afloat for as long as she does. Even though they are breaking down. But I do remember, and that sensation of numbness that you're describing, I mean, literally, it's depression. When people say, like, depression is just the absence of joy, it's not. It's well, at least for me, I understand that people experience it differently, but it's not just joylessness. It's, you're not sad, you're not happy, you just are. And then everything else is running amok in your head. Like, I don't know if I'm mad at this right now. I don't know if I think that this is stupid. I don't know if I'm anxious. And, often, like, statistically speaking, depression and anxiety often run hand in hand. So, like, it all makes sense. And it's really well personalized. I am very far from a person who can diagnose Riley, but I definitely agree with your point that is a direction that she is heading in if something is not done. And I mean, not to spoil the end of the movie, but it does end okay. And from what I understand, like, everything gets rebuilt and she's okay. So, like, this pivotal moment comes around and her parents step in the right way, and the school, it seems like everything seems to come into a place where she escapes it, like she doesn't fall deeper into depression. But the building stones, ironically, the building stones, a crumbling of everything in order to create depression is definitely there.
Yeah, and so to break it down a little bit further, so some of the warning signs that we might see with childhood depression, we definitely see with Riley to a certain degree. So we see her be irritable after her first day of school, and we can gather from Riley as a person that a lot of these reactions are sort of out of character for her. So she's irritable and her dad sends her to her room. We're going to talk about her parents, I think, at some point, but them being what they were. So she definitely has some social withdrawal, whether that's just part of the move or even in these initial first days of school where she sort of sits on the bench by herself. She sort of has this sort of increased sensitivity when she Skypes with her friend from Minnesota who has a new friend. It's like, well, that's it. Now I feel like I'm losing my friends. So now I'm angry. So now I'm rejecting people. Even things like, she's having nightmares. So she might be having changes in her sleep pattern. So there are a lot of what we might think of as initial warning signs, even if it's not full-blown depression, because as you said, there are some really healthy, positive signs at the end of the movie. She's back on the hockey team. Seems like she's making friends at her new school. She even is talking to a boy. All good signs, right?
Right. Right. Not for her dad, but she's
right.
happy.
Well, yeah. And that also I can relate to, but yeah, so we see these signs, and obviously she's making some very impulsive decisions when she decides to run away. The thought of an 11-year-old stealing the mom's credit card and buying bus tickets and walking to a bus station and actually getting on a bus is obviously terrifying for me as a parent, but also would be another sign of something concerning going on here, that this very out of character impulsive decision would be a sign that maybe something's going on. Again, not necessarily full-blown depression. She might not fit that diagnostic criteria, but it would be some really telltale signs that if she didn't, let's say, get some healthy responses and some healthy support, both from her family and assuming from the school, then we might see kind of what you and I have been talking about, where this is going to head in a worse and worse direction.
That's actually my question for you, if you don't mind. This is,
sure.
I get really interested in pathology, I have to ask you, what would kind of be the next signs? Like, I do know, like, depression is, if you've been sad for X amount of time and it doesn't seem to be going away, like, it's not just sadness, right? It's
Yep.
if you have this feeling of helplessness for this long. So what are other, like, what else, what other things that Riley would do that you'd be like, all right, yeah, now she's definitely depressed? Like, what is she missing?
So basically, because this is so early on in the moving process, like it's so early in the adjustment period,
right?
The things that you would continue to see, let's say if depression symptoms continue to worsen, you would see her grades and ability to focus and concentrate would be negatively affected. A lot of times kids who are depressed complain of physical ailments, everything from stomach aches to headaches, kind of any reason to, in some cases, avoid social interaction. So we already saw Riley, decides not to go out for the hockey team. Those signs continue where it's very clear that she's not making positive connections, making friends. We would be concerned about that. Obviously, some of the other classic depression symptoms, things like fatigue, low energy, low motivation, and I've worked with kids who even start to think about really serious things like death or things not mattering. What's the point? These sort of early signs of hopelessness. So that can be really scary for a parent or a teacher to see, but that's what childhood depression looks like, is that even with Riley, we start to see this numbness escalate to the point where she's not feeling anything. She's on that bus just like flat. You don't see any emotional response in her face until, the metaphor is completed. Joy and sadness come back to headquarters, and she's able to let herself feel sad about this adjustment that she's going through.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you so much. Thank you for indulging that.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to, because it's and going back to my own personal story, I think that's why, I probably didn't get to full blown depression, is that, my grades didn't really suffer. Eventually I made some friends. I did, play tennis. It's funny, like relating to some of Riley's islands of personality. Hers would have been hockey. Mine would have been tennis. What were her others? Because I want to get into that stuff too, because I just think that was so fascinating.
It's family, right? Yep. Sports, Friendship
Hockey,
Island.
yeah. Friendship.
And Goofball Island.
Honesty, Goofball. Love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and like at least 4 of those I could definitely identify to, family, Goofball, sports, and probably honesty. I was not a kid that lied, or at least not a kid that lied well, like you knew if I was trying to get away with something. So I just thought that was so well done in terms of trying to simply kind of show what, and really how simply, a kid's personality can be. Because really you're just starting to develop your personality. They can be kind of focused onto these 5 core traits.
Right. Yeah, no, I absolutely, I love it. It was interesting to me as a kid who came from a bad, I didn't have those foundations. And looking at Riley having them was really interesting. Again, was a really interesting way to see that, like, oh, okay, well, she has these built up and they're falling down. Well, I didn't have Family Island. It was kind of rocky, and Goofball Island was firm and steady. It was going, and maybe that kept me, going through some stuff. I didn't have
Sure.
like a sports island, so I was looking at it and kind of understanding it's exactly what we're talking about. That wow, she really has some really nice support mechanisms set up for her. They crumble, but they're
Yeah.
there, and there's something to build off from going forward. Whereas somebody who doesn't have that example, myself, might have a harder time creating something like a family island because you never really had one before. So you got to
Yeah.
build one from scratch when you're in your 20s, Not to
Sure.
make it like super dark, but that's
No,
sitting in
absolutely
that
right.
theater. That's what I was
Yeah.
thinking about. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to kind of put a bow on this by talking about sort of how Riley's emotions resolve, I guess, like get back to a point where they're sort of operating in the way that they quote unquote should be. So we know joy and sadness kind of get sucked up into long-term memory, and they're trying to get back up to headquarters. And the sort of lesson that Joy is learning over time, which as a therapist, I just love, I couldn't love anymore. Joy basically doesn't understand why sadness exists.
Yeah.
Like, why are you here? What is
Right.
your purpose? What good are you? You don't seem to make anything better. And they just can't understand one another. I mean, at least sadness sees the quote unquote importance of joy. She says, like, you're not up at headquarters. Like, Riley can't be happy without you. But Joy looks at sadness like, what am I supposed to do with you? What is this?
Right. And sadness in herself is because of the emotion that she is, she cannot find her own value. Like, it's up to Joy to figure out what the value of sadness is, because sadness is not going to say what her value is. She's going to kind of continue falling deeper and deeper and being like, well, it does seem like I'm useless. You're totally right. And Riley
Yeah.
is Riley can't go on without you. She wouldn't say that about herself. Right.
Yeah, really well said, because, while sadness can't sort of identify her own value or even like advocate for herself, which is also reminiscent of depression, she's very good at empathizing, right? We
Yes.
see that sort of that pivotal scene where Joyce starts to see something going on, where Bing Bong is sad because his rocket has fallen down into, is it the subconscious, the unconscious, whatever the big giant
Oh,
pit
I don't
is.
remember. Is it we should know this. It's subconscious. I want to say it's the subconscious, because then everything is lost and erased from memory. So that makes sense.
Nothing
All
comes
right.
back from there. Whatever
It is now,
whatever it
guys.
is.
Okay, it is now.
So Bing Bong is very sad, and Joy kind of goes to what a lot of people go to when they see sad people, which is just that I want to make you feel better right now as quick as I can in whatever
Oh.
way I know how to.
Yeah.
Very dangerous, right?
Oh, we
And
love
very
that.
unhelpful for people who are depressed or
Right.
anxious. What does she do? She basically tells a joke. She does a little dance, anything to just put an even artificial smile on Bing Bong's face. And it
Right.
like is not connecting at all.
Well, that's another fascinating piece, because that's exactly it. Like, Joy does represent that, like, that person that's like, I just need you to be happy right now because I can't really handle, I don't understand why you're sad. So I'm just going to need you to come onto my emotional level. You can't do that. All right. I don't really know how to register this. And
Just
then
find the fun, which is like
Right,
such
yes.
a perfect little line.
Yep.
And it's not working. He keeps crying candy, which I love also.
Which is not the worst. Okay. Let's,
No,
let's,
but if you're
right?
gonna cry, you might as well cry candy.
Cry candy. Yeah. It might as well
Yeah.
be useful.
But then sadness kind of goes over, and Joy, even though she discourages sadness from like trying to help because she doesn't understand what sadness could possibly do, she sits down with Bing Bong and just validates how he's feeling. Yes, you lost that thing that's important to you. That's sad. And he almost immediately stops crying, and he's just like, yes, like, thank you for seeing me. Thank you for understanding how I'm feeling. Okay, I think I'm better now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what an incredible sort of display of what people who are struggling really need. They need
Right.
validation, they need understanding, and they don't need to be pushed into
Right.
something that they're not feeling or that they're
Right.
not trying to or even wanting to feel necessarily.
Right. I don't need you to fix the problem. I
That's
just
right.
want you to acknowledge that there's a problem.
Yeah, that
and
there's
what
pain,
Joy,
yeah.
and what Joy is literally doing is being like, there's no problem. We just need to
Mhm.
focus on the joy. Right. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so I love that. And then so Joy starts to understand, and then they're going island to island to island trying to get back to headquarters. Finally, Joy and Bing Bong fall into we'll just say the subconscious, since both of us can't
It's
remember
a subconscious now,
what that
okay?
thing is called.
Yeah.
Now it's a subconscious. Excuse me. Joy finds one of the memories that she identified as this sort of joyful, happy memory, right? I think it was the hockey team like picking her up on their shoulders and, oh, this is so great. And then when she like rewinds it, which I just love, and we're going to talk about the memory
Oh my
aspect of this.
gosh.
Yeah, she rewinds it, and then it turns from yellow joyful to sad, because Riley was actually sitting on the tree stump by herself, sad because she had just, I think, missed the game-winning shot in the hockey playoffs, and they lost the game, and she blamed herself, so she was sad. So she was sitting by herself, feeling sad, and then we see her parents come over to her, recognize that she's sad, and want to help. So they give her this big family hug. She starts to feel a little bit better. The kids also recognize that she's struggling, so they come over, and now they all lift her up on their shoulders, and now she's happy again. So the happiness comes from Riley being allowed and being able to feel and show her sadness. So this finally starts to click for Joy. And again, as a therapist, I'm like, God, this is so good, because we're recognizing the usefulness of sadness. When people are allowed to and validated in their pain and in their sadness, that's when they can get the support that they need to then feel happy, or even just to be able to move forward, take that first positive step.
Yeah.
And it's incredible. I don't know what to say.
It's the whole cheesy thing that
Yeah.
people say that's really true. Like, well, you can't experience joy if you don't know what sadness feels like. You need the polar opposite to really appreciate than when you are happy, almost. And for somebody, using myself as an example with depression, like the moments when I am joyful, when I am experiencing like happier emotions, those are moments that I hold on to, and I use those then as a foundation to like kind of continue a more positive outlook. Like, hey, I do remember that I do feel at some points, I don't feel sad, I don't feel hopeless, I feel this emotion, and I remember it because of this memory. And yeah, the whole thing is just fantastic. It's exactly what you said.
Yeah. Yeah. So Joy starts to recognize this, and that's when Joy finally kind of lets sadness in. She lets sadness exist. You know,
Right.
she determines that sadness has to come back to headquarters with her, that she can't just be selfish and go back herself with all the core memories, that she needs sadness to be there as well. So they get sadness back, and then Riley is finally able to sort of make the objectively healthy decision of not running away back to Minnesota on a bus,
Right.
and be sad and go back home and acknowledge her sadness to her parents. So, and in that moment, as we saw with the memory that Joy shared before, because she tells her parents that she's sad, her parents are able to validate that it's okay that she's sad, that they're sad too. And then we see that perfect little smile comes over Riley's face when she gets that big family hug.
Yeah.
That's like, okay, she was heard. It was okay that she was sad, and now we can really deal with it.
Right.
So yeah, so what a perfect little ending to this story.
Well, and it is kind of important, right? So she also learned how to name the emotion, because she
Yes.
didn't necessarily understand what was going on, right? She's just angry. She's not happy. She's not sad. She doesn't, she's not an age where she can identify what emotion is doing what. And so in the end, for somebody to say, it's okay, this is sadness, and it's okay that you're experiencing it. Oh, wow. Now everything can click, and now everybody can move on. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful
Yeah.
story.
So let's take a couple minutes to talk about Riley's parents, and then we're going to take a quick break, because I had a couple bones to pick with them. I don't know if how you.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, they're very sweet, and it's frankly, it's just nice to have two parents in a Disney movie.
Yeah, they're like human. Yeah.
that are
Yeah.
human. But yeah, I mean, so one of the things that really jumped out was when Mom came into Riley's bed and, acknowledged Dad's all going through his new job thing, but just sort of asks Riley if it would be so great if you could just keep being our happy little girl.
Mhm.
And I cringed so hard when I saw that,
Yeah.
because to ask your 11-year-old child to be happy, even though, I mean, can't we just assume that any move is going to be a difficult thing for a child to experience? So to assume and even force them or ask them to be happy through that kind of experience is just, I mean, dangerous might be too strong, but at the very least, probably invalidating to the likely stress that they're experiencing. So you maybe liked her parents a little bit more. So what would you take away from them?
So I might be idealizing them, and I remember also cringing at that scene and being like, "Ooh, points off for mom."
Yeah.
And the same thing with dad, because dad like starts playing with her at one point, but then he's like, "Oh, okay, I got to take this business call."
Yeah.
But what I appreciate, I mean, first of all, there are worse parents. You guys
Oh, no
talked about
question.
Frozen.
We
First
have.
of all, there are worse parents in Disney
Way
movies.
worse.
Second of all, how human are these guys?
Absolutely.
Because I, as a kid, you're not looking at the move and being like, yeah, my parents are also having a hard time. Gee, I should really give them a break. But you get to see that other side of it, of like that whole stress that I, as an adult now that has moved, knows like, oh my God, where's the van? Oh my, when do I start work? Where's my stuff? I don't even know where my bag is. I can't feed my kid right now. All right, the last thing I need is for you to be pouting. Can you just be happy? And like, so as much as I'm not happy with it, like that's not cool. I would not condone the behavior, but I definitely would say that like they're very human, and I do think that their positives outweigh their negatives, like the way they acknowledge her emotions, the way that ultimately they are there for her and they are looking to make sure that things are good for her. And her mom does kind of try to take care of her when she's at hockey practice and she kind of quits midway through, right, the tryout. Like there is, she says, let's go out for pizza. And she kind of tries to create a little bit of a distraction. And so I do think are they the best? No, but are they doing a good job? I think their error is in their being human. So it's okay.
Well, I think you made a great point, and they are human, and to that extent, they do really create these parents as really good characters who are flawed, and we can be empathetic of the fact that they're not perfect. They're probably going through their own stressors,
right?
So maybe they don't react as well as they could to their 11-year-old's sort of emotional situation, but if anything, if we're talking about, if we're giving advice, for example, to parents as they go through moves or other big changes with their children, I've talked on the show before about there's no too early to getting therapy or to getting to evaluation, but there is a too late sometimes, unfortunately. So I shouldn't even say, I mean, that's never a too late either.
There's a later than preferred.
Therapy. There's less than ideal. Yes.
Yeah. Less than ideal. Yeah.
Yeah. So, for parents, if you have any concern or any signs like the ones we've been talking about, like, please let it be a okay thing for you to, get a relationship with your grammar schools or new schools guidance counselor. Hey, could you check in on Riley? It's her first day. We've moved, we just want to know how she's doing. Like all these things I think would be important things that, and it's a short movie. We can't cover everything, right? But,
right.
But that's what I would hope and what I would suggest to parents going through this type of transition.
Awesome.
Yeah. So let's take a quick break and then we'll come back with overanalyzing the memories aspect of Inside Out. You are listening to Pop Psych 101, a show discussing mental health and pop culture through two perspectives, a therapist and an advocate. We explore the accuracies of how mental illness is portrayed in movies, books, and television, for better or worse.
Do you get the feeling that there's a hidden, deeper meaning in your favorite movies, books, and TV shows? Look no further. Therapist Ryan Engelstad goes so deep that what he brings back may not exist at all. This is Overanalyzing with Ryan.
All right, so this is Overanalyzing with Ryan and Marie. So thank you, Marie, for joining me on this segment, because this is something we like to do sometimes, where we take a part of a movie and we break it down to the smallest or most personal way that we can. So we've talked a lot about in the first half in Inside Out, the sort of emotional aspect of this movie, how they interact with each other. But we didn't really talk at all about the memories part, which I thought was also such an integral part to, both how Riley's personality was formed and also just like how I think people develop as individuals as well, because their memories have a big impact on that. So maybe you could lead us off with your own analysis of the sort of memories portrayal of Inside Out.
Oh boy, can I? Do I have so much to say about this? I first of all, I was blown away by the description. So I have PTSD, and that means that memories to me are sometimes this very harmful thing that just like appears out of nowhere, and then I'm literally living inside of it. And then I come out and I'm like, whoa, okay, where am I? This is not the past. I'm safe. I'm fine. But there is that moment of literally reliving a memory, literally being inside of it. And so in that, I've been fascinated by memories. And so I remember just sitting there and beaming as they explain how memories are stored, right? So she gets all these memories throughout the day, and they're different colors depending on the emotion. And there's different colors are sprinkled in, and then at the end of the day, somebody's in charge of throwing them into long-term memory while she's sleeping. And I was like, wow, that's incredible, because that's what happens. That's their current prevailing theory on how memories are formed. So that's a reason why sleep is super important and is important to people who have PTSD. So that's that. And then they go into this like filing library, and I think both of us would be remiss if we didn't at least once say, double mint gum, it'll make you smile.
It's triple dent. Isn't it triple dent?
It's triple dent. It's triple. I said, I messed it up.
That's all right.
So I didn't remember it as well as they wanted you to.
Well, it must pop up more in my memory a little bit more frequently than yours.
Oh my gosh. But there's so many. Who has not had a commercial that just like there's somebody messing with you right in your brain going like, let's just throw this one on and see how she likes that. And it's once again, it's the commercial, and everybody in headquarters goes, oh, yeah. and that's exactly what it feels like. And I remember watching this movie with my community, and everybody just in the chat, because we watch it through like this program where all of us can talk at the same time. Yeah. And everybody in the chat was like, oh no. And all of us, they have it on YouTube, just that bit. So like you could watch the whole commercial.
Just the triple dent gum commercial.
Yes. And then, it really gets stuck in your head. But so the triple dent gum commercial is one thing. But the reason I bring it up is that is literally the best way that I've been able to explain how PTSD memories come to. Like it's literally a malfunction where something out of long-term memory gets thrown in as a current event. So like you're in the middle of going through your day and experiencing those memories, and then all of a sudden something pops in from long term that you weren't expecting, and you're in that moment of like, oh, I don't really know if this is happening presently. I'm really experiencing all the emotions and everything that I experienced while that was happening.
As if it was happening now.
Yes, as if it was happening now. And that's something that when you have PTSD, I think a lot of people don't know, or maybe it doesn't occur to everybody, but that happens with positive and negative memories when you have PTSD. It just kind of like this machine is malfunctioning, and it's just throwing out whatever memory it feels like, and your ability to discern whether or not it's happening in present time is kind of the main issue. And as somebody who's gotten to like a really good place with my PTSD, where now I can like I see a memory and I'm able to, I don't go into like full flashback mode anymore. But I remember at one point like asking my husband, how do you remember things? What is a memory like for you? And he goes, well, I just think about it, and then I don't. Right. Like then I don't.
Intentional recall. Yeah.
Right. Yes, exactly. And I remember my mind being blown, and I remember watching Inside Out and thinking about what that meant to my memories. Like, oh, if this is how they're stored and this is how they pop out, then it means if they're stored properly and like organized and alphabetized, then eventually they kind of, they stay in their place, and the machine doesn't just like pop them in there whenever it feels like it. And so that was a very pivotal moment for me, as some like understanding memories through this movie was just super important to me.
Yeah, and we talked before about depersonalizing. I mean, so it's almost like, we saw those little workers in the brain. So it's almost like that there's like an evil little bad worker somewhere in there that like recognizes something that's happening in the quote unquote real world. That's like, oh, this is similar enough. I'm going to kick up this thing that scares her or makes her angry or makes her disgusted or sad or whatever, and I'm going to kick that up there without warning.
Yep.
And it felt like gosh, I wish that they could make an Inside Out for like every diagnosis, but like
Right.
every
No.
but yeah, just because of that, because I think it is so helpful for people to be able to break down what's happening inside my brain in a way that I can understand, so that when it happens, whether it's a flashback or even a bad dream, I can say, oh, this is what's happening. I can understand that. And now I can sort of know what I need to, let's say, cope. Right.
Yeah. And I know it's slightly moving away from it, but
No,
still
it's okay.
in the same vein. I love that the control board gets more complex as
Yeah.
Riley grows up, right?
Yep.
We have a moment where we see mom's control board and dad's control board, and they're a little bit more evolved, and different emotions are running the show there, and that's like a
Yep.
whole separate thing. All of that is just so relatable, is so helpful in comprehending. Like, I was sitting there as an adult and I was going through my emotions, kind of making these mental check marks of like, oh, that's what that is. Oh, that's what that is. Oh, that's really cool. Like, I walked out of that movie and I was like, they need to show this in school. Like, what are they doing showing all these like boring psychology, no offense,
That's all right. It is.
documentaries and whatever, like explaining, oh, this is the amygdala works. Like, that's not important. Tell me how my memories are stored in a way that I can comprehend it.
No, I'm with you. And
yeah.
I've shown Inside Out in my therapy groups that I've run in the past. So trust me, I'm with you 100% on that. If I could explain whether it be depression or just like emotional volatility to people, this is what I would show them. So I'm with you on that.
That's yeah. So that's my whole thing.
Well, thank you. And so that's overanalyzing. So I think with that, Maria, I'd like to just wrap up with maybe our overall reviews of this movie. So if you know the podcast, I review on a scale of 1 to 5 some things on sort of how accurate it is of depicting various issues. And then Mike will just do his overall review of how much he loved the movie, 1 to 5. So I'll go first. I rated this movie out of 5 core memories, or 5 bing bongs. I rated it a 5 because this movie is flippin' perfect. And that is my bias showing, because obviously I can relate to a lot of things that are happening, but I don't care. It's perfect, and I don't want it to change, even if there is a teeny tiny little plot hole when she could have sent the core memories up just like they sent the triple dent dumb memories up.
Right.
But I'm not going to nitpick. So I give it a 5 out of 5 for Inside Out in terms of how they portray childhood adjustment issues or depression. So what is your review out of 5 for Inside Out?
Well, you gave people a warning that I'm a huge Disney nerd, and I clearly sound pretty enthusiastic about it. So I'd be lying if I also didn't give it a 5 out of 5. I do, again, like, I walked out of that movie and have rewatched it so many times, feeling more aware of myself, understanding things about myself that I did not going into the movie, and then just the entertainment value. Like, you don't have to overanalyze and go into it and be like, this is the psychology of it, to walk out of that movie and be like, that was really fun. That was just really fun to watch. And a lot of us had a bing bong, and a lot of us were sad when bing bong is no longer with us.
Gosh.
And
I intentionally didn't talk about it because it's one of the saddest things I've ever seen.
Oh yeah, that's when we were watching it with the community. That was everybody's like, why is this happening?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be a Pixar movie,
That's true. That's true. Some very sad thing has to happen, and boy did it.
Yeah. But yeah, so I'm going to give it 5 out of 5 Mickeys. I think they did a fantastic job with this one. They're definitely, I'm going to go there because I just want to make sure that people understand. So like, they know, your usual co-host, they know what his taste is like. So I'm going to say, just to compare, Up has like a 3 out of 5 Mickeys for me.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Just because
Okay.
like they sadness is just too much of a crutch there, and I'm not having it. And I think that all the emotions are represented very well in this movie, and I absolutely 5 out of 5.
All right. Well, there you go. There are our reviews of Inside Out. So, Marie, thank you so much again for joining us here on Pop Psych on short notice, nonetheless. So, one more time, please plug your show so people can know where to find you.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. It was obviously fantastic. And for having me come on to talk about this movie in particular. It's very near and dear to me. So thank you for the honor. I do hope our lovely Mike feels better soon. And okay. All right. Plugging myself. I can do this. So everything about me that you need to know, you can find by going to mxiety.com. All of my blogs are there. All of my publications outside of my media blog are there, my podcast episodes, and you can also watch my stream from there. So my live stream is Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern. We have wonderful discussions with a beautiful community of welcoming people. So if you ever feel like you just need to go and talk and feel welcome somewhere, that's the place. That's where you can find us. And I think you'll feel like home.
All right. Well, thank you so much again for joining us, and we look forward to coming back on your show. And with that, we'd like to thank Kevin MacLeod for doing the music on our show. You can find him at incompetech.com. And with that, thank you so much, and we will see you next week.
Bye.
Okay, so I could have talked about Inside Out for another whole hour, but instead I'll stop and focus on a few important takeaways from a mental health perspective. First of all, depression in children is not only possible, but it can be incredibly damaging if left untreated. It is so important to validate children's feelings and experiences when they go through big life changes. Riley's parents are human, but they also make the mistake of telling Riley how they want her to feel instead of letting her have her natural emotional reaction to the move. Secondly, one of the most damaging things we can do to our mental health is to deny our completely normal emotions. Joy tries to put sadness in her own little circle, but this only leads to sadness reacting more strongly. Our emotions need to be expressed, and if they are, they will resolve naturally instead of leading us to worse reactions or decisions. As Joy learns, all emotions have their purpose, and if we can practice self-awareness so we can understand what our emotions are trying to tell us, we can often prevent negative self-thoughts and destructive behaviors from setting in. Thank you so much for listening to our show. Thank you as always to my co-host and executive producer, Mike Graham. If you like the show, please check out our social media pages. We are on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and YouTube at PopPsych101. We are specifically on YouTube for our fans who may be hard of hearing. We also love hearing from our listeners, so if you want to give feedback or suggest something for us to cover, you can email us at poppsych101@gmail.com or join our Facebook group. Pop Psych 101 is not only a podcast, but also a radio show. You can find us on the real-life radio station on Dash Radio. If Dash Radio is not installed on your vehicle, you can download their app on Android or iOS. For the podcast, we are on all major distribution channels, so please rate, review, and subscribe. We greatly appreciate it. For Mike Graham, I'm Ryan Engelstad. Thanks for listening to Pop Psych 101.